The story of the wilderness economy is the story of a transition from extractive industries to the commercialization of a wilderness experience. This transition involved lumber barons, transportation interests, real estate speculators, and tourism entrepreneurs. The Northeast was settled extensively because of the vast and diverse nature of seemingly endless natural resources. The Dutch traders established settlements around harvestable goods such as fur and minerals. Although mining actually became commercialized as early as the 1770s, by the Gilded Age, these initial enterprises had borne their fruits. Meanwhile, growing cities increased demands for more goods and more natural resources. By the 1800s, the Adirondacks were key to producing timber, iron, and charcoal to help power forges. Unlike New England, the Adirondacks were bound for resource extraction rather than permanent settlement or agriculture. As the New York State Forest Commission report of 1885 expressed, the scanty population which still struggles to compel the inhospitable soil to yield its miserable existence too plainly shows the hopelessness of the task. Since the agricultural exploits weren't as successful as residents originally wished, the primary industry in the Adirondacks through the 1800s was lumber extraction. At the beginning, lumber was used in 3 different ways: logging, barking, and charcoal production. Logs were stripped of the bark, which was subsequently soaked, and the liquid was used for tanning furs. Logs that weren't transported down the river were used for charcoal production. The kilns which produced the charcoal were brick or stone dome structures which burned the logs for many days to turn the logs to charcoal, which was used to smelt iron from ore in nearby forges. Other men came to share in the economic opportunities generated by the lumber companies, and blacksmiths, grocers, and other small entrepreneurs followed the men to the edges of the forest lands, where they established small communities closer to that frontier ideal.
So the first river drive was in 1813 on the Scroon River, and that continued through the 19th century and into the 20th century. In fact, the last river drive was on the Hudson in 1950. But towards the end of the 19th century, we started to see the advent of truck and rail transport. We started to see the railroads coming in. So then those companies were able to remove hardwood timber. They could not remove the hardwood previous to that because it didn't float. So towards the end of the 19th century, the rail lines were coming in. They were able to remove those hardwoods, but they did continue to use the waterways well into the 20th century.
Down, Derry, down.
What they were doing with the land they were getting
A shivering wind bright, there's someone plug him.
As this schematic shows, one railroad head could access a large area of land. As opposed to rivers and streams, these logs were bound for the railroad, and railroad heads could be put virtually anywhere. Stoddard observes, railroads surround the entire wilderness, like the iron frame of a landing net with spurs penetrating well into the wilderness. Meanwhile, the industrial economy led to densely crowded cities, which were fraught with disease, dirt, and immigrants, who the upper classes found undesirable neighbors. As a result, financial giants wanted to escape the grime of the city to access the sublime wilderness of the Adirondacks. However, they not only wanted to access it, they wanted to tame it and create great camps that allowed them to experience both luxury and primitive scenery. The entrepreneurs who had marked the industrial age also turned their attention to creating wilderness retreats. The great industrial and financial entrepreneurs, men like Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan, and William Durant, retreated from the industrial centers they helped create to a wilderness that they would also help create. Not only the super wealthy, but also the sporting men of the middle and upper classes sought access to the wilderness experience. According to the great Camp Sagamore National Historic Landmark Museum, the same rail lines that extracted resources from the wilderness also brought back a rising flood of tourists seeking to escape crowded, polluted city life. Seneca Ray Stoddard put this longing for wilderness eloquently when he says, Wanderers are we, in search of the beautiful, as with our backs to the dusty city and our faces set toward the mountain, we move swiftly along. Durant was the leader of this new architecture, which used resources found naturally in the Adirondacks to create luxurious camps fit for a king. Durant built these camps on remote lakes and pristine, huge tracts of land. You can't get something from nothing, and it quickly became apparent that the cost of easy lumber was a serious environmental shift. With few permanent residents and a drive for extractive production, the Adirondacks were devastated with forest fires and regular droughts resulting from the heavy clear-cutting of the region. As more and more people began using the Adirondacks as an escape, it became clear that the deforestation was taking away from the beauty and sublime quality of the wilderness, and muckraking journalists and illustrators like Julian Ricks made it clear to the public that extraction of natural resources was destroying the Adirondacks. The shift pitted two strong economic agents against each other: extraction of forest resources to the greedy growing cities versus the watershed users and outdoorsmen who were becoming increasingly worried about the destruction of the forests and watersheds. A New York Times article from 1889 focused on this destruction. The headline reads, "Despoiling the forests, everything being ruined by the rapacious lumbermen." Included in the article were phrases such as pirates of the forest, lumber thieves and poachers, useless forestry laws, radical reforms urgently needed. In 1894, New York passed the Forever Wild provision to its constitution, which has since preserved 3 million acres of the Adirondack wilderness to create a vast state park in which forested wilderness areas were not subject to any more extraction or development without changing the Constitution. The destruction of the wilderness showed that New York can't have its cake and eat it too. The natural resources provided by the Adirondacks were not endless, and restrictions had to be placed on industry in order to preserve the natural beauty of the wilderness that attracted those looking for an escape from the urban landscape. New York had a decision to make: either strip the wilderness of its resources at the risk of spoiling the watersheds and tourism, or preserve its natural beauty as a new, bigger Central Park for the leisured classes. In effect, the extraction of natural resources for urban industry created the conditions for the exploitation of the wilderness as a tourist resource. Those core prerequisites included a transportation network to more tourists, accumulated capital to build camps, and public opinion that favored watershed conservation over rapacious timber extraction. Without industrialization, there would have been no wilderness.
Clear cutting, and then, once you cut all the productive.
Hey, you! Yes, you! John Casper Cream Puff Milk Toast. Is modern life getting you down? Do the crowds make you feel like a sheep in a herd? Does all this new racial mingling and urban poverty unbalance your sense of hierarchy and national purpose? Are you pale, scrawny, and exhausted by endless hours behind a desk? Well, sport, ditch that desk. Lace up your boots and head to where real men roam and ramble. Paul Smith's Hotel on beautiful St. Regis Lake has the Adirondacks' greatest assembly of guides and wilderness resources. Paul Smith's Hotel will put a gun on your shoulder. Paul Smith's Hotel will put a trophy on your wall. Paul Smith's Hotel will put a paddle in your fist. A fishing rod in your hand. Snowshoes on your feet. And a smile on your face. After 2 weeks at Paul Smith's Hotel, your city chums will hardly recognize the rugged, manly, healthy individualist that you have become.